speaking at a game developers conference in July 2013, Tim Sweeney predicted what was going to happen within the next 10 years in the business. Quote, "We'll be able to render environments that are absolutely photorealistic, like indistinguishable from reality." End quote. Now this Tim Sweeney is not a nameless nobody. He is one of the founders of the software company Epic and a leading programmer of its most successful product, a game engine with the ambiguous name Unreal that is designed to control the interplay of movement, colors, shades, shapes, and space of video games. First introduced in 1998, the Unreal game engine works in the background of hundreds of games as different as Unreal Tournament, an online first-person shooter, also known as ego shooter, Adventure Pinball, a weird mixture of the pinball tables from the bars and a level-based adventure game, Magna Carta, a role-playing game, a variety of Star Trek adaptations designed as shooter or adventure games, and a recently published Goat Simulator, where the objective of the player is to create as much mayhem as possible. In this perspective, Sweeney's prediction may not only be a business pep talk, but also a fairly educated guess and an expression of a desire. Games should become photorealistic, yet it also raises at least two questions. What is his idea of photorealism, and what happens if games indeed become photorealistic? Let me start with the first question. I think we can safely assume that Sweeney's understanding of photorealism is neither that of an art nor of a photo historian. Thus, his idea of photorealism probably has little to do with those artists. Sorry. Oh God, that's not true, is it? It is. No, it's not. With those artists of the late 1960s and early 1970s, such as Chuck Close, John Bader, Tom Blackwell, and others, that were and still are labeled as photorealists. Sweeney rather refers to a more popular understanding of photorealism, similar, for instance, to that of advertising industry for images generated not with the help of a camera, but with digital graphic design. I won't go into details here. I just want to stress that the one thing that both the art historical and the more popular approach have in common. The term photorealism was and still is only applied to images that were and are of non-photographic origin. That photographs are photorealistic apparently is self-evident. At that point, however, the discussion of photorealism becomes a bit blurred, as it remains unclear to what understanding of photography and of reality the composite term photorealism refers to. On the one hand, it could be related to the photographic image. That is what the photorealistic artists had in mind when they created works that in all details mimic the appearance of photographic images. On the other hand, however, the term could refer to photography as a mode of most faithfully representing or reproducing or even mimic reality. In this perspective, a photorealistic image would be as realistic as a photograph. In short, a photorealistic image could be two things. It could appear like a photograph, which is what the paintings try to do, or it can appear like reality itself. And there is some evidence that Sweeney had rather the latter definition in mind. However, this reading of photorealism also needs some more fine-tuning. The photographic pictures that this understanding of photorealism refers to are all of one kind. They have to be normal in a way that they are focused and clear, that is, that they lack all the flaws photographs can have, such as being, for instance, over or underexposed or being blurred thanks to movement or lack of focus, or in short, photorealism refers only to photographs that indeed are photorealistic in the sense that they are taken as reality itself, or at least as its indexical representation. This concept of the photographic image is about as old as photography itself. The truthfulness of the depictions is a recurrent theme in early texts describing the experience of first seeing a photographic image. And the astonishment that pervades these descriptions makes me wonder whether the property attributed to photography that it can make a picture appear as if it was reality is nothing but the primordial and fundamental punctum of photography. To this, that after having seen countless paintings, engravings, and drawings, the authors of these descriptions around 1839 found themselves confronted with images that in the mode of representation radically differ from what they have seen and known till then, images that translate reality into an iconicity unseen before, images that cannot be only subject to the studium Barthes describes as, quote, a kind of general enthusiastic commitment, of course, but without special acuity. Images that, on the contrary, provoke this acuity by details that fill the whole picture. And I cannot help but wonder whether it is this assumed relation of photography to reality that still is at the core of all the perceptions of a punctum in a photograph, that the photorealism of photography is inextricably connected to the Barthesian saïté, to the maybe mistaken but irrefutable consciousness that what the photographic picture shows has really happened or has really been. Theory of photography has long dismissed the idea that photographic images were identical or accurate, and for good reasons. Yet the everyday use and perception of photographic images, yet for the everyday use and perception of photographic images, this idea still carries much weight. Reading photographic images in more mundane contexts still depends on the assumption that one way or the other they are what they show. May it be the portrait in the ID connecting the appearance of the bearer with his or her name and other identifying data. May it be the photograph of an advertisement promising that an identical commodity can be had. May it be the photograph in the news that claims to show a truth that the viewers cannot experience for themselves. However, I think that this understanding of photography as being a representation or duplication of reality depends upon that many viewers do not only have a knowledge of photography as a passive beholder, but also an active one. Photographing family and friends, showing and taking the pictures around, and talking about them actually is not only experiencing the Barthesian saïté, but also a biographical this is you and this is me. That is, an experience of being identical to and with an image that shows my reality without showing the showing itself. Or, once again, with other words, to varying degrees, these images are perceived as if they were identical to the reality that they show. Now, what happens if we take this more pragmatic understanding of photorealism being a mode of duplication of reality and apply it to Sweeney's prophecy? How do video games change when they become photorealistic? As part of computing, video games are quite old, at least if games qualify that are adaptations of real-world games such as OXO that has been programmed and played, though not marketed, as early as 1952. What you see, however, is a much later animation. Later games such as chess allowed rather complex playing while being based on relatively few rules. And already in the 1970s, the first chess computers appeared having a graphical interface like this one. The surface, however, is rather reminding of the diagrams printed in the papers than of the situation the player experiences at the board. It is kind of an abstract bird's eye view. Now later programs have abandoned this abstraction and tried emulating to what the player is confronted with. And it might now look more familiar, but the game, its rules and objectives have not changed a bit. The same applies for other games such as card games. Being digitized, they can either remain emblematic and non-representational, or just as representational as cards are anyway. All the game can be added a bit of human touch, a phantasmagorical sociality by way of adding some players with faces and even mimics, and molded after a variety of beauty ideals. But making these games photorealistic would not change the rules and the play at all. Being mainly decorative, it may enhance identification with the figures and immersion to the game, but even that is contested as photorealism is no precondition for immersion. Quite the contrary. Some of the early video games that have next to no model in analog reality are entirely graphic. Such as, for instance, Tetris. The task of the player is to rotate and shift falling blocks of different shapes so that they form a line at the base and vanish. Developed by a Russian researcher in artificial intelligence and first released in 1984, it turned out to be that addictive that psychologists spoke of the Tetris effect. When people devote too much time to the game, they perceive the analog reality as just another digital game space and mentally try to move the different shapes of objects they encounter so that they fit in lines. Or with other words, the real reality is overgrown by the game reality. Tetris is still being played today, but similar to chess and card games, much has been done to improve the visual appearance. The blocks are given plasticity and sometimes quite some visual effects. But here too, these improvements have no effect on the game itself. And they certainly don't give the game greater semblance to the appearance of the real world. With strategy games such as Civilizations, things seemingly change. The player's objective is, as you can read, to build an empire to stand the test of time, following the path of a somewhat teleological model of history. They start in 4000 BC with a small city and some units, and over time they will develop new skills and invent new technologies from pottery to nuclear fission, though strangely not photography, which they will clash with other civilizations and in the end fly into space, searching for new worlds to colonize. The map of the original game is rather coarse, but version after version it became more of an aerial photograph. More units were introduced, the narration was refined, and sure enough, the overall graphic were refined. The model of this kind of pictoriality undeniably is photography. And while at times it appears to be clumsy and the movements rather stiff, the overall gameplay is not changed much by this kind of, pseudo-photorealism. The reason is similar as it is for card and board games. The gameplay of Civilization 2 is based on rounds and it thus can never become time critical. Let me sum up my observations and arguments till here. It seems that photorealism is of limited importance for three kinds of video games. First, for adaptations of analog or real reality games such as chess or poker. Secondly, for games that are based on geometry such as Tetris. And thirdly, for games where the player is some godlike and disembodied figure absolved from time and space and controlling the weal and woe of more or less mute and equally faceless underlings. Or, to condense it even further, photorealism appears to be a rather decorative addendum for games that are or can be played on a two-dimensional surface. So what happens when the game surface is no longer a map or a board or another surface to be looked upon, but a space with depth and distances? What happens when the player is no longer godlike, floating over the events and controlling them with just a gesture? What happens if when he or she becomes part of the game instead and does not only act but is also being acted upon. The changes can be observed quite well with games that go from 2D versions to 3D versions. Take for instance Castle Wolfenstein. Yes. That was first released in 1980 and where the task of the player is to escape from a Nazi prison. The graphics are already a bit mixed. While the maze of doorways and chambers is conceived of as a map seen from above, the avatar is seen from the side. Some 12 years later, Wolfenstein 3D was released. And while the task was similar to the first game, the graphics had changed dramatically. The perspective is one into the game, an ego perspective, and when the Nazis shoot, they do not aim at a matchstick man, but they look the player in the eyes. And there is one more element that connects the player's real body to the played virtual body. At the lower end of the screen, the muzzle of the gun, controlled by the player, aims into the game space. This design of the space has had a few predecessors, but it's applied and still refined till today. Doom, which you possibly remember, Doom, released in 1993, also features the gun pointing into the game space, but here the hands holding the gun are visible too, as if they were extensions of the gamer's body, thus making them part of the played body. With this, the screen is no longer just a graphic surface, it becomes a membrane connecting the reality of the game and with the reality of the player. With ego shooters such as Wolfenstein and Doom, video games went 3D with an egocentric perspective. And what now happens if those games strive for photorealism, or, to be more precise, photo and time realism? Let's look at one of the latest games. DayZ is a so-called online... Oops, let's go a bit further. DayZ is a so-called online open-world multiplayer game, to wit, it is a game where the player encounters a rather small number of players and a rather large number of zombies in a vast post-apocalyptic landscape, which, by the way, was sculpted out of an area in Czech Republic around Ústí nad Labem. There are no missions to accomplish, no high scores to achieve, no levels to make. The sole objective is to survive by getting equipped as fast as possible and to explore the world. This world is created with a loving care for details of the visible surfaces and on at least some natural laws too. If you bleed, you start to shiver and finally faint, and if you jump off a building, well, you die. With other words, the game has a lot of options and of contingencies, and thus a certain similarity with the complex realities of life. And what is the... Excuse me for the graphic scenes. I'm afraid that I didn't look into it. Sorry. And what is the role of photorealism herein? Well, basically, it is of secondary importance. There are many other games that are equally complex. Take, for instance, Minecraft, that is made of blocks and populated by block-headed animals and figures, and yet it is complex as hell. And on the other hand, photorealism is applied to less complex games too, such as, for instance, Dear Esther. Dear Esther, which appears to be rather a hybrid of a narrative film and some elements of video games. And what photorealism does might be just this. It makes the game resemble photographic films. At the same time, photorealism makes the screen into an ever more permeable membrane. And in these games as films, the viewer-player is not a subject just watching what is played for him or her. He or she becomes an acting subject, an actor creating and being in the image that he or she looks at. This connection between producing images, looking at images, and being part of the images on the one hand, and the body of the player on the other hand, is strengthened by the development of new interfaces between game and gamer. On the one hand, the body and its movement is employed to control the game. Devices such as Nintendo's wireless, this is the wired version, let us see, wireless Wii translate the bodily movements in space into movements in the game. And display units such as Oculus Rift combine stereo glasses with sensors for position and allow the space of the game to be perceived as the space in which the body moves, while at the same time the non-game reality surrounding the player is being blocked from view. You can see the guy playing, moving his head, and you can see how the screen changes. What he sees depends on how he moves his head. For the time being, the structures of the games, their narrations and subjects have not changed much, and in particular the opportunities of the enhanced technicality of bodily perception just start to get explored. One can have a bit of a glimpse of future developments in the business with games such as Ambient Flight, which currently is available only as a demo. Here the gamer is an eagle flying through mountainous landscapes. To this, he or she gets another non-human body moving in space, this time in this case, the body of wings. But it is of more importance, I think, how these games and technologies and ways of world-making shift the role of the image, or more, the role of the photorealistic image, and with it, of photography. Let me conclude with some loose ends concerning games, photorealism, and photography. If the images generated with the help of hardware and software become indistinguishable from reality, as Sweeney has predicted, then the relation of photography and reality starts sliding once more. At the beginning of my lecture, I briefly described the relation of the ontology and the pragmatics of the photographic image, while the more recent ontological arguments emphasize the difference of the pictures to the depicted realities. The pragmatic approaches of everyday life depend upon photographic images as duplications of reality. From the pragmatic perspective, Sweeney's photorealistic games, together with sensory controlling and feedback devices such as Oculus Rift or the Wii controller, change what happens to the player. The experience is not one of images anymore, but one of bodily realities. That is, the games are not only visual perception of the player, but the games do not only address the visual perception of the player, but other senses too. And with this, the possible reality check that the pragmatic understanding of photography relies upon erodes as well. What is real and what has happened can be mixed up with lots of different ways. Mixed up in lots of different ways. And it is something that already happens around games such as DayZ. Maybe that some players took up a routine for themselves in redefining their roles within the games, that they do not attach to some of the several groups and clans that fight and build together, but understand their role as that of an embedded journalist, writing pieces on the fights that go on in one world or the other and publishing them online. And on the other hand, the region around Ústí nad Labem in Czech Republic has recently seen a bit of game-related tourism, where players in camouflage seemingly trying to reenact what they have been playing online before. The second remark, excuse me, what you just saw were, well, the one is actually a screenshot on the right-hand side from the game, and the other is actually the landscape around Ústí nad Labem. A second remark is concerned with another sphere where visual and real realities converge. That they do so is known not only since Jean Baudrillard in 1991 claimed that the Gulf War never took place as it dissipated in the images the media distributed. If in his example, the media coverage overrides and overcomes the actual reality that no picture, no photograph could ever catch, the opposite is true. The opposite is happening too. With cameras that do not only recognize faces, but only snap when the face is recognized as being smiling by the camera, like in this case. Let's wait a second. With smartphones that do price checks, with smartphones and programs that identify a commodity in a shop and can find out whether it can be cheaper elsewhere, as for instance on Amazon. Or with digital mirrors. This thing doesn't work, I'm afraid. With digital mirrors for virtual dressing that glue a garment on the customer's body and make him or her see how it would like. To name but a few examples where images do not reproduce reality, but rather create, form, and be them. And probably the most important and impressive recent example is Google Glass, with which the visible reality is not only withers into just a photographical surface, but where this photographical surface becomes an augmented reality and is superimposed with all kinds of data, connections, and imagery. These technologies make the real space into an image, and vice versa, the image into a real space. How far spread and random these amalgamations are can also be seen with the recurrence of 3D visuals in cinemas and private photography, with advertisement props that protrude from billboards and shop windows and even form from seemingly insignificant phenomena such as the embossing of book covers and packages that has become again so fashionable in the past decade after it was seemingly dead for about a century. To this, it can be seen from applications that are rarely functional in the modern sense, but they are not only only decorative too. They make use of reality as space that is real and virtual at the same time. And a last note concerning the fate of the punctum. If photorealism is at the core of the punctum, and if the punctum is what can connect a certain photographic image more or less violently to a beholder, exciting is subjective amazement that this world is really like this and generates pictures like this, then photorealistic games and augmented realities possibly reshape this amazement and with it the punctum. The punctum, and the exhibition here is but one example, depends on subjectivity, difference, and detail. And this is exactly what the digital photorealism can deliver. Visualities that are detailed and unique and different to anybody and everybody, but realities that can be shaped and reshaped at will by the subject and as well by industry and states. Which means that the punctum is no longer confined to images taken from the reality we consider to be real. Or, with other words, the photorealistic games of the future cease to be realistic but become real. And if the virtual reality of the games becomes photorealistic, so does the real reality. Or once more, with other words, if Sweeney's prophecy becomes true, how can reality then be distinguished from the games? Thanks for your attention.